you asked about lime, right? It produces a biofilm. Limes, a lot of people think that the cause of limes is the Borrelia bacteria. Other people think that's one of the causes. In any case, that bacteria is very hard to get rid of. It's very antibiotic resistant. The biofilm that nano produces for the purpose of breaking down soy protein, from what I can figure, but by the way, it breaks down the biofilm around the Borrelia bacteria so that bacteria can get to it. It's a key thing. The nanokinase, the nano enzyme, together with not serapeptase. I guess it is serapeptase. No. Anyway, with the enzyme that silkworm bacteria make to get out of the cocoon. Anybody think of what that is? Anyway, those two combined, they make a supplement. They have it in the Briar Patch that has those two, and extremely powerful for getting rid of Lyme and scarring that you want to get rid of, stuff like that. Anyway, I'm kind of preaching to the choir here about all this nonsense about probiotics. I mean, you guys know this stuff, and you've been talking about it for years, and now it's in the mainstream media. They're talking about how 10 times more of the cells in and on our body are not our own than are our own, because it's bacterial cells. 100 times more bacterial DNA than our own DNA. So that's common knowledge. So how about this for something to think about? What do you suppose the reason for that is, that we've got all that going on in us?
Because we need it.
Right?
Because we need it.
Because we need it, right? But even that, above
they
that...
They need us.
This is a really humbling thing when you think about it. And to me, it's irrefutable. I mean, why have we outsourced on this scale? This isn't like the United States outsourcing everything that matters to China. This has to have a survival value or it wouldn't be happening. It's been going on for forever, and it's doing something really important. So why would it be? Why would it be that way? Can anybody think of why? It's both humbling and awe-inspiring. It's because they're better. They're better at all this stuff than we are. And this stuff is critical stuff. I mean, genetics is a big part of who we are, what we are. But epigenetics is huge too. And epigenetics is us, our genetics, responding to the outside world. So if we get a challenge or something, we respond to it. We change. We can't change that fast. Bacteria can have a generation in 20 minutes sometimes. They can do stuff that we wouldn't have a chance. So the outside world is in our digestive tract. That's not inside, that's outside. But it's in a controlled environment, full of all these bacteria, responding to all these challenges and whatever. Digesting something, whatever. They're doing it all. Our immune system, all kinds of things. So I think that's a pretty amazing thought. I don't know.
Yeah.
They need, it's a symbiotic thing. They need us, and yeah, it's like with the compost tea thing, where the bacteria and the fungi in the soil are feeding the plant, and the plant is feeding them, and they're both existing together and benefiting each other, and it's the same thing happening in us. Absolutely. But still, that question to me boggles my mind sometimes, figuring out, I mean, I'll get into more detail on all the things that nano can do, and sometimes you just have to shake your head and say, how did this ever come to be? It's just phenomenal. Here's kind of a joke or a true story, I don't know which, but it comes from a more innocent time, a long time ago, from the early days of quiz shows. And back then, people didn't realize that those things were rigged, and somebody was feeding people answers so that the prize would build up to the astronomical level of $64,000, and the whole nation would be tuned in watching this thing that was so incredibly exciting. Can you imagine winning $64,000? So anyway, part of ginning up the interest is they'd kind of chat these people up a little bit and get to know them. So on one of them, they ask this question: what do you think is the greatest invention of the modern world? And the first guy says, well, it's got to be the television. And they say, what's the big deal about that? And he says, well, you can be sitting in your living room and you can see something happening anywhere in the world. That's just amazing. And they say, yeah, that's pretty cool. So they ask the next guy, okay, what's the best invention? He said, oh no, it's got to be the airplane. Well, what's so great about the airplane? You get on that sucker and a short while later, you can be any place in the world. That's just amazing. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So they asked the third guy, and when people heard his answer, they probably should have figured he's not knowing those other questions they're asking him. But anyway, the third guy says, well, I think the thermos is the greatest invention. And they say, thermos? What's so great about that? And he says, well, you put something hot in it, it keeps it hot. You put something cold in it, and it keeps it cold. And the guy says, yeah, so what's so great about that? He says, how do it know? So that's where I'm at with NATO. I'm shaking my head and saying, how do it know? Because the most amazing things are being done by these guys. So I'm trying to figure out how can this bacteria, without directly taking on, weeding and feeding, and I mean it's sitting here in your gut, and how is it doing it? How do it know? And the thought occurred to me, it's got to be quorum sensing, because bacteria have a mechanism to communicate with each other, and they have another to communicate with bacteria of another species. And
it's like in the soil.
Yeah.
The interrelationship.
But the way quorum sensing works is, I think they call it genetic expression. They don't do their full genetic expression until, through quorum sensing, they determine that there's enough of them to get away with what they really want to do. And so they put out this chemical, and they're all multiplying. I'll talk about the light one. They're all multiplying and multiplying, and then there's enough of this chemical that they're communicating with, and they say, there's a lot of us now, let's go for it. And we're familiar with this when we get exposed to a cold. That's one good example. We get exposed, and everything's fine for a few days, and then all of a sudden we're sick. Well, the reason for that is because the bacteria have done quorum sensing. There's not enough of them at first. They're building and building and building, and if they went into their pathogenic mode right away, our immune system would pick up on it and go after them, and they'd be wiped out right away. But if they wait until there's enough of them to mount a really good attack, then all at once they all do that, and boom, we're sick, and we have a hard time fighting them off. And what Holly was just talking about, there's a researcher from Princeton named Bonnie Bassler, I think it's Bassler, and she's got some amazing videos on YouTube. Highly recommend them, especially the ones about this squid in Hawaii that feeds at night. It goes over the bottom of the ocean, and it has a pouch inside it that's full of bacteria that are luminescent bacteria. And when they build up to a certain level, they put out light. I don't know why they want to do that, but that's what they want to do. And so this squid has this pouch of these things, and when it's going over the bottom of the ocean, it doesn't want to cast a shadow. It doesn't want to be seen. So it's got these, it sleeps down in the sand during the day, and these bacteria are building up, and right about nighttime, there's enough of them to start being luminescent. And it has shutters that open and close just right, so the level of light matches the moonlight. Wow. And if it's a dark night or a slight moon or it's cloudy, whatever, it matches it. Wow. And it goes along over the bottom, and you can't see a shadow.
Wow.
And then at the end of the night, it lets out most of those bacteria. And then they're building and building, and then the next night they're ready to go again. So I was thinking about how natto, a lot of people have trouble with fermenting natto, or they think they have trouble. They don't have as much trouble as they think, but but they're looking for that slime. They want that biofilm because it's full of vitamin K2 and nattokinase and all kinds of great stuff. So it turns out that the natto are doing quorum sensing, and when they get enough of them, and they say, okay, we can make enough film now to break down this soybean, let's go for it, and they start putting that stuff out. And you don't see that except at that stage of fermentation, which is usually around hour 6 or 8 to hour 10 of fermentation. That's when there's a whole lot of that slime. And if you keep going 24 hours, which you usually do, and it's not moist enough, you're not going to see that film because it's kind of dried out a little bit. That film is extremely hydrophilic. It can hold 5,000 times its weight in water. So there's all kinds of industrial things that they're starting to do with that. So anyway, I started thinking that this quorum sensing thing is probably how they're wiping out all these other pathogenic bacteria, because there's a type of quorum sensing that's between different species of bacteria. And so I was kind of thinking about that and trying to figure out if maybe that, it seemed like that kind of a far-fetched notion that all these diverse kinds of things that could be getting rid of. And I kind of came to just an explanation that works for me, but it's kind of fanciful, and here's what it is. Weston Price talked about vitamin K2 being an activator. It seems like what's happening with natto is not activation. It's something a little different, and I was thinking maybe a regulator, but it's not quite like being a regulator. And what seems to match in most situations for me as an explanation of what's going on is that it's a conductor. But not a conductor, not an electrical conductor, more like a symphony conductor. It's just sitting there from one place saying, do this, do this, do this, do this, and it's not really doing that much. It's just doing all this stuff. I don't know how or why, but sometimes that's the only explanation that seems to work until you find a better explanation. And here I've found a better explanation, at least for the how, not the why, of what we're just talking about as a probiotic. So I'm going to read what one scientist has said. Nonetheless, Bacillus subtilis, which is natto, nonetheless, Bacillus subtilis remains one of the most potent and beneficial of all health-promoting and immunostimulating bacteria, according to clinical studies documented in the medical research report, Immunostimulation by Bacillus subtilis Preparations by microbiologist J. Harmon. The cell wall components of ingested Bacillus subtilis are able to activate nearly all systems of the human immune defense, including the activation of at least 3 specific antibodies, IgM, IgG, and IgA secretion, which are highly effective against many of the harmful viruses, fungi, and bacterial pathogens which regularly attempt to invade and infect the human system. Seems to me like that's the how. That's a big part of the how. But what we're going to find out, I'm sure, that's just one part of the how. Because everything that natto is doing is not, from what I've seen, as soon as you find out it's doing something, it's not doing it in one way, it's not doing it in 2 ways, it's doing it in a bunch of ways, and in a bunch of real diverse ways. So anyway, you can see I'm preaching to the choir. This is